Hi everyone, I am so excited today that I have one of my students, Eilis. Now, Eilis is 12 years old, she's autistic, and she's absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to ask her a whole bunch of questions about herself today. All right, Eilis?
Yay.
I'm so glad you're here. I'd love to hear from you a little bit about how you experience autism.
All right. I guess it's difficult for me to describe it, but I'll do my best. I'm trying to think. I'm sorry. It feels awkward. I guess there's not one specific thing that I experience with autism. It's multiple different little details that just build it up, I guess. There's nothing specific. It's just tiny little things that build it up. I hope that makes sense. I guess that it can be difficult for me to understand certain things in a certain way, but once I'm able to move it into my own way, that half of the time everybody's like, that's not how it's done. You may get the right answer, but that's not how it's done. For example, math. Why am I bringing this into schoolwork? If I just do it a certain way, it makes sense to me, but when I do it everybody else's way, it doesn't. I guess that's one little detail.
Yeah. And then what about like senses? I know we've talked a lot about your sensory experiences.
Yeah.
So what do you think seems to be different about how you experience senses than a so-called neurotypical person?
Well, certain things, like certain noises or things that like touch or they feel slightly different, I guess, is like I would notice it more than I normally would with certain sounds, noises. Some of them have a positive effect and some have a negative effect, where some of them can make me feel really uncomfortable or anxious or nervous, or it can just really bother me, while other ones are kind of just there. Like sometimes with noises that really bother me or like get me upset, they usually, if I hear them, they sound louder and they usually trigger some sort of emotional reaction. And it's the same with touch, which is why I'm so particular about clothing, is if it feels a certain way, it triggers a certain reaction that can lead to just a meltdown because it feels really uncomfortable or it sounds uncomfortable. So
And I know too that certain sensations you don't feel as strongly. Like we've talked a little bit about your pain response before.
certain things just really annoy me, while other things can make it feel generally painful. Like it almost, with fabric, it kind of feels like scratching with a fork on it, because I hope that does make sense, but I've just done that before for whatever I don't know why I did that. I just wanted to see how it felt. It was a stupid decision, but it was like, this is similar to what it feels like. It kind of just feels like a fork scratching down whatever part of the body repeatedly, or some sort of thing. Just, it hurts, even though there's nothing on it that could make it hurt. I don't know what it is, but I guess my brain just makes me think it hurts when it doesn't hurt. Yeah. And then it hurts.
Yes. And then you've injured yourself before and you haven't realized it right away.
Yeah.
Talked about that, so that's interesting.
I can like get like a huge cut down my leg and then not even notice it for 3 days.
Wow.
I've done it before. Like the other, I got like a big cut on my shoulder and never noticed it. And then like I don't know how long I had it, but like when I finally noticed it, it was already healing, and I was like, how did I get that? I just don't really notice it too much. Like, I don't notice a lot of cuts or sores. I probably notice more sensory issues than I do, like, if I actually were to hurt myself. I notice that, like, more, and I guess that's confusing, but
Now, I'm thinking about sensory, and is school really overwhelming because of sensory challenges?
it can be. There's just a lot of, because it's very loud, and even when like everybody's supposed to be quiet, there's still noises that I pick up, and it's kind of like once I hear them, I can't ignore them. It's like it's all I hear. I can basically drown out every other noise, but I only hear that one noise or the noises that frustrate me or send some sort of emotional reaction. There's like a lot of just talking and a lot of people in general, which can be like it can be panic inducing for me. Just even if I'm not necessarily interacting with them or anything, just knowing how many people are there and everything, all the noises that come along with it. There's a lot of like just things that can make it not a pleasant experience, which usually the three things that bother me the most is the noise that comes along with it, the amount of people there, even if there's like not many people you can see, I can still notice a lot of people, um, and just some of the like some of I guess it can just it's anxiety that comes along with it because those things or just school in general can make it all over the place and a frustrating experience, which usually one thing is that I pick up a lot of small noises that I guess most people would just be able to brush off and continue on. um, So like if I hear something that's like even a one-time noise, like if somebody makes like a small noise, it just repeats in my head over and over again. It kind of is like ringing in the ears, and even if it stops, it just it's kind of like for some people how like if like somebody accidentally scrapes their fork down a plate, or if like nails down a chalkboard once or something, and it's like normally I guess most people would bother them or really it would hurt for some people for a couple of seconds and then it goes away. For me it doesn't. It just continues and continues and continues, which is what sends me into some sort of meltdown or panic attack, which it's always embarrassing when that happens because I can sometimes like see the other kids like looking at me or wondering what's wrong, or like seeing me stimming, and I don't know how to make it seem more normal because I guess some of them don't fully understand why I do that and why it bothers me so much. Because like somebody could make a noise that maybe bothers everybody like 10 minutes ago, and then I can have that over and over again, and then eventually it just gets to me 10 minutes later and have a mental breakdown because it won't go away and it hurts, and everybody's just like what's wrong? Well, it was 10 minutes ago, and I don't know how to explain that it's just repeating over and over again.
So, like, what would you like peers to know more or understand better? Or what advice do you have for peers?
I guess the try and maybe I'm not really sure. I guess maybe that people would kind of like understand that if somebody's in a state like that, it doesn't really help when people are like looking or crowding. It's just better to have one person at a time try and help, because with multiple people it becomes even more overwhelming. So like in I hope this doesn't come off wrong, but it would be better to just ignore than to stare or like to try and help when multiple people are doing the same thing. It's just it makes it so much worse for situations like that.
And I think
Yeah.
people, if people perspective to take perspective, if they took perspective, I think we can all relate to that. Like if I'm upset, if I'm crying about
Yeah.
something, I don't want people staring at me. I
Yeah,
don't want people around. So
yeah.
that's a really good.
Which I can understand that some people don't mean any harm by it, but it can send off the wrong message very easily. And it can sometimes not just, this isn't just something with autistics though. It's that, like, if somebody's staring at you and you're upset, it can still send off the wrong message. Like, why are they doing that? Are they like, oh, am I? It makes the person feel embarrassed better than helping them, or it can make them feel more stressed, as it can just add on other types of anxiety on top of that. So there's just so many things at once. It's very overwhelming.
Now, what about with teachers? You've had lots of great teachers. What are some things that you think teachers can do, or that have helped you, that you think would help other autistic kids or other neurodivergent kids?
I haven't had this happen a lot. It was mainly just with one teacher that I had, but is that a lot of the time, um, when we struggle on certain subjects or certain things, um, is I've had like a teacher like kind of being public about it. Like, it just makes it feel so much more anxious. Like, it's kind of, even if that's not what it means, it's kind of like if the students is struggling with something or having trouble paying attention, it, if you like, you say it in front of the, like, if you go over to that person's desk specifically, or go up to the whole kind, or say like while you're teaching, it makes it very stressful, because it's very humiliating, because it's difficult enough to focus, but that just adds on, like, it makes it's I hope this makes it adds on, like, now, like, I'm worried that, like, everybody's thinking about what like she just said about me, whatever, and it makes it a lot more difficult to focus, because if somebody's having trouble with something, adding on like some sort of embarrassment, it doesn't really help, because I've had like teachers, if like I was having trouble, one of the subjects that I struggle most in is math and language, because it's very difficult for me to process the math, because I have to do it a certain way. It doesn't make sense. And with the writing, I just don't like writing about things that I don't like writing about. But I've had like teachers come up like while they were teaching or whatever, and like I was trying to I guess one thing that helps me is that I can't focus on just the teacher. I usually look down, and like I usually just look down at my work, and I guess that gives off the message that I'm not paying attention. And I've tried explaining that to teachers before, and they just sometimes take it as like I'm just saying that because I don't want to get in trouble for not focusing or not putting that effort. But it makes it so much more difficult. And I've had teachers like just say like in the middle of teaching, like, look up, what are, like, you're not paying attention, why aren't you focusing? And when I would try to respond, I'd just get the same thing, and it would make me feel so anxious, because I would just feel worried and embarrassed
So
about like having that happen again, and it would all be I'd be able to think about for the whole class usually, or the whole day.
I can understand that. Well, I really like both of those ideas that you shared. So one is like, don't call someone out, don't embarrass them.
Yes.
And also the idea of understand that listening looks different for different people, and that that's okay.
Yes.
I love that
Yeah.
you have self-advocated around that, and you've tried to explain that to teachers. And I think that's something that's important that we do, is help people understand that the expectations that we generally have for classrooms are based on neurotypical, but they're not the only way of doing things.
Yeah. Like, I can understand like somebody thinking like somebody's looking down, they're not focusing. But if you've been repeatedly told that it doesn't look the same in every person, and not everybody will be able to look focus the same way that others can. Somebody could be looking down or doodling but that doesn't necessarily mean they're not necessarily focusing. In some people, that's a coping strategy to help them focus. And one thing that I don't like is that can be explained to somebody so many times, but no one gets it. It's okay to not learn the same way or understand things the same way as somebody else, especially not just with like neurotypicals to autistics, but also autistics to other autistics.
Yes.
Like, not everybody learns the same way, and that's all right. It doesn't have to be so, like, not everything doesn't have to be the same way. Not everybody is the same way, and I find that, like, that kind of expectation very, like, stuck up to an extent and not really flexible.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. So we talked a little bit about some things teachers can do. Now, what about with like tests and assignments? What are some things that have helped you manage work and handle those things?
Some things that help me is in physical school, which obviously most likely not the case for most people right now, is I would usually ask for breaks at least. I hope this doesn't sound like a lot, but at least once or twice per subject, and usually each subject was around an hour to an hour and a half long, and it helped me focus a lot, especially during my tests. Like, sometimes I would just ask. In one case, I had a teacher that didn't really fully understand why I needed those breaks, so sometimes I would just kind of lie, and instead of saying, "Can I please go on a break," to make it help a bit more, like, just, like, walk a bit for, like, a minute or two. It helps me. I would just say, "Can I use the washroom or go get a drink?" Because whenever I said if I could have that break, she would always say no. And and usually she would also say no to those things, which is why I tried my best. I usually tried to find some sort of excuse or lie so I would be able to do that. And that's one thing that I don't want other teachers to do. It's so important to allow students to have those breaks, and not necessarily like recess breaks or whatever, because it's just like a break to grab some water or like to calm down if they're stressed. Because if you just make them sit there, it just progresses instead of stops. It just makes it more difficult.
I can't wait.
Yeah, so that was a fun year.
Eilish, I can't wait to show teachers and the beginning teachers that I teach in the summer. I can't wait to show them this so that they come into the profession having this understanding. Now,
Yeah.
I've also been in virtual school. So, what has been difficult about virtual school this year?
A lot of things. Not gonna lie about that part. Probably just, I feel like it's been very difficult to keep on top of work because I've I've noticed that it was already difficult in regular school. Is that how I've found the education system works is that it's kind of like work on top of work. And I'm not, when I say that, I don't mean that like giving work is bad, because it's the whole purpose of school, but it would be so much easier if it could just be spread out a bit instead of like on top of each other. Because how I kind of feel is that like I'm given all this stuff to work on throughout the day, and during the actual class not as much time to work on it, and then we have it due the exact next morning, which can be very difficult because it can take long enough to get the one assignment done, and it's just over and over and over again. And it's like, it's very difficult to get it in on time. And then once it's already late, there's kind of like this mindset that just settles in place, is that it's already late. I've already basically lost the grade. What's the point of finishing it? And it's just something that stresses me out because and So, like, if that amount of workload was just split up more evenly, so, like, say, for example, on one day, 7 assignments. Math, language, French, I don't know, whatever people have as assignments. Um, and then splitting that up instead of just like having it like, okay, if you didn't finish it, you get it done by tomorrow, because half the time the lesson takes up more than the actual work time, and it's very difficult to finish in that time because we can't work mid-lesson because we're still learning how to do it. And if we could just kind of like have those lessons, and then it's like if we could have the lessons during the day and then the small work time, we could have the lessons, and then say the next day or so we could work on those assignments during the work time. I hope this makes
It does. I love that idea because
is that like you learn it on one day. So let's say like on Monday you learn all the lessons, and then on Tuesday you learn the lessons for another day of work, and then you complete Monday's work. So like basically you can work on Monday's work, and then instead of making it due the next day, you could work on it. It's like I hope that makes sense. So I'll just try and describe this better. Monday you have the lessons for all the work. Tuesday you complete Monday's work, or you spend Monday like evenings, like homework time on Monday, completing Monday's as much of Monday's work as you can, and then on Tuesday during class you complete Monday's work. So I guess I'll type my idea in the chat to make this slightly easier.
I think you were doing a great job of explaining it.
Yeah, so like you have the lesson.
Understanding, and it's you teach the big concepts, you give children time to process those ideas, and then the next day they're working with those ideas, and you as a teacher are getting a chance to see if they understood what you taught yesterday.
Yes. So that way, yes, exactly like that. And kind of like you do the lesson on the day, and then you work on, so you have a lesson for that day and you work on the work from the day before. So then you had time to process it and everything, and then the next day you will work on the work that you were given that day. Or you can also start that work during homework, so like after school. So that way, because you won't have as much time to complete it, you'll be still able to process it, and it will be able to stay in your memory. I just hope that makes sense, because I feel like it would make it so much more easier than having to get it done on the same day along with all those other assignments that come along with it. It just makes it so stressful.
And I'm sure it doesn't feel good to see a long list of assignments or missing assignments. It must make it seem like, how will I ever catch up?
Yeah.
Now, what about parents? Especially thinking about virtual school, what are some things they can do to help at home?
I guess there's different things. I feel like a lot of different subjects that would, but one thing that I feel like would help is kind of like, I've noticed that one thing is that it's been more difficult to like explain certain things that like are not, is if like something is difficult for a student, then like say they have a missing assignment. I'm sorry that I keep like just saying random things. It's my way of processing my information and then saying it. I start by saying like tiny little snippets, and then I get to the full idea.
It's okay.
Yeah. Is being able to properly explain themselves necessarily for what's difficult, because I guess that it can kind of be stressful when like they have a missing assignment and they're trying to get it done. I've noticed that one thing is that if you have a small missing assignment, it kind of like, if you feel stressed enough to, then you sometimes don't say that you have that missing assignment, and then that becomes worse. And then by then, I feel like once the parents find out, they are mad. They're not happy about the fact that they kept that missing assignment. But I've noticed that if sorry, if it could kind of like, I feel like if it would be less scary to like not have to keep all these missing assignments secretive, if it was like, and I hope this doesn't come across wrong as that parents aren't helping or anything, because that's not the case. I'm saying that like, if it could, in my case, I noticed it is that from the couple of times that I've kept missing assignments from my mom, is I sometimes get nervous about like getting yelled at, and everything. So it makes it like even scarier. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm just gonna hold on to this for longer. But I feel like if it was less of like a yelling thing, or like if it was like less of, I'm not, okay, I hope this isn't coming across wrong. Like, don't reward them or don't reward it. I'm just saying like, be calmer about it. So like, not saying it's okay, just like, I noticed that that's one of the reasons that I get so nervous to talk about missing assignments, because then I'm just worried about an outrage.
Yeah.
So I feel like if parents could be slightly calmer about it and a little bit more understanding, then it would be easier for students to ask for help. It would be easier for students to get help with missing assignments or get help with something they don't understand, because they're less worried about that.
Of course, that makes sense. And so a calm conversation about, okay, what is hard about this? Why is it hard?
Yes.
What
Instead of like yelling about why they didn't get it done on time, because then we barely get a chance to explain ourselves because there's so much yelling. It's like it's difficult.
I think too, Eilish, that's something that adults forget a lot. But I always think if I had a boss who yelled at me and who made me feel guilty, I probably wouldn't like working there very much. And I think teachers need to remember that, and parents need to remember that we would feel the same way.
Yes, because I feel like if that's the kind of like message that, like if that's the kind of response that parents are giving, then instead of that, like basically, I feel like parents, obviously, I'm not like, once again, not bashing at parents. I'm saying that I feel like sometimes that message, they kind of make it think like, okay, well, now that they've learned, if they do this again, they're going to get that again. But instead of it being like a prevention thing, like the child is like, okay, well, I'll never do that again, it instead just makes it does the opposite effect, because then they're just scared to deal with that again.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make it stop, it just does the opposite. But if you approach it with a calmer kind of, if you use a calmer approach, then it's more likely that you'll be able to not have that happen again instead of yelling. It's kind of like the same thing, for example, of like, say, it's kind of like the same thing at like, for example, yelling at a dog for eating something or eating a shoe, whatever. I've never had my dog do that, but they're not going to stop really. They're just going to do it again. But if you use a calmer approach necessarily, or like if you use a calmer approach, and this isn't just me bashing on it, this is something we've tried with my dog and it has worked, using a calmer approach instead of yelling at him, then they stop. And it's the same thing with a child or a teen necessarily. It might not work the first time, but it will definitely have a better effect than yelling at them.
And correct me if I'm making an assumption, but the original problem isn't not having done the assignment. There's a reason why the assignment was hard.
Yes, I guess.
So getting to the bottom of that is going to be more helpful.
Instead of just yelling about why the assignment was done and telling them to get it done. Because I feel like one thing is that when that happens to me, my mom's like, why didn't you ask for help? Why didn't you do this? And I usually say, like, it's because this is what's happening, because I hope this makes sense, is that, like, I don't ask for help because I'm nervous about that happening again still, so it kind of just slips off my mind. And it's kind of like the reason I didn't ask for help for it is because this would happen. I feel like it just makes it more difficult.
I know this year you and I have talked a lot about self-care and
Mhm.
developing and practicing strategies because
Yeah.
you are anxious. I'm anxious. People are more anxious. So what are
Yeah.
some things that have really helped you this year?
Probably one thing that I know not everybody can do because not everybody has one, but definitely just being around my pets, I feel like, because even though I can't do it necessarily all the time because like I'm not at my well, that's a lie. I have been at my house most of the time, but it's I feel like they don't really care about their they're smart, but they're still kind of oblivious to the world. And that's like, it's just that pureness. It makes you feel so good knowing that your animal doesn't care if you don't know how to do math properly. They don't care if you, they don't care. They love you anyway. And it's just such a nice feeling to sit with them and like pet them or play with them. And it just calms me down so much. That's how I've been starting my day every morning. Get up, play with Mikey, and if Scratch is still awake, play with him. So I just play with my animals when I need to. Usually, I can only play with the hamster during the night, obviously, because they are nocturnal. But my dog is always there because he doesn't sleep.
And then I know you've been doing some other things like Haven.
Like the havening, yeah. That has been helping a lot because it's kind of like just when I've kind of like stopped focusing on whatever has been stressing me out and kind of just doing those movements, it feels a lot better. Like I've tried another thing called this tapping thing that's kind of similar to the havening, but one thing that doesn't help is that the tapping, they don't really like say anything. They just like, okay, now do this while you make your cup of tea. Do this while you do whatever. But like you're still focusing on something else. So you're literally just tapping your skin repeatedly. You're not doing anything. It's not doing anything. But when you're doing the havening, it's like it's quite it's helpful because you're only focusing on that. And even if you just tapping repeatedly or doing something repeatedly doesn't necessarily have any effect on you just doing this repeatedly, it kind of it makes your head think that it helps because you're only focusing on that, which makes it feel better because once you're only focusing on that one thing, you forget about whatever was stressing you. Usually it comes back later, but it's not as worrying.
Yes. And you get a break from some of that stress,
Yes.
which is nice.
Another strategy that I've been trying is I guess just I've noticed that breathing strategies they never really have helped me that much because while I'm breathing, I'm just like I'm still stressed. Kind of like it's like this isn't helping. I'm just doing something that I do literally all the time. I mean, I'm just doing what I do every minute of every day, every second of every day. It's nothing different. It's like I've been doing this for as long. I've been doing this already. It's not like it's much different. So I've noticed that one strategy that has been helping me is kind of just lying down and trying to think about like not like lying down isn't actually lying down kind of like how I am now and then just looking across a room. Usually I might do it outside and just look at something, like look at different things that calm me down and then just focus on that thing for a couple of seconds and try and only really think about that thing and then move to something else. And it's just calming because I'm just thinking about those things. Like one thing that I usually do is I go outside into my backyard and I just look at these different little things that I find like that I find peaceful or cute. And one thing that I usually always look at is either this little rabbit and squirrel statue we have, the bird's nest up in the trees, there is a bird's nest up there, or I just look at some of the leaves or on the floor, and it kind of just calms me down because I'm only really focusing on nature. It's kind of like with the havening, I'm only focusing on that.
Mhm.
So, calming.
Yeah, it grounds you. And the added bonus of getting some fresh air, too.
Yeah.
You've also been taking a self-care day as needed
On Wednesdays,
on
yes.
Wednesdays. So tell me how that's been working for you.
It's been working good. Usually what I do is I just don't use my laptop, my phone, or anything else really. I just do things that mainly just calm me down. Like usually how it goes is some things that I would do on that day. I would go outside. Um, I would go outside, play with my dog and my hamster during the night, bake, something like that. I would maybe just watch a show that I enjoy. Currently, I am obsessed with Modern Family and Queer Eye.
Wonderful.
Yes. And I guess I would just use all the strategies that I know, and it kind of helps because I don't really focus on too much. And when I do focus on something, like it makes me anxious, I just go straight to my dog, and then he just calms me down.
And I have to say, I'm very honored that you and I get to talk on Wednesdays, so you include that as part of your self-care day.
Yes, because it's calming. It's nice.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I really love it too. Now, I also wanted to say, okay, I'm thinking about what a parent or a teacher might think. You know, when someone says, take a self-care day midweek, they're going to wonder, how is the work going to get done? Are you going to be as efficient? So what would you say about those things?
Well, I feel like I definitely have been feeling more efficient than I usually have been, and on those self-care days, I usually get the work that I missed on that day. I will usually get a certain amount done, so I don't do all of it, but I might do. So, for example, the other week I had a project, right, on that day. So I would work on that, and I would work on like bigger deals, but like ignore the smaller stuff. And my teacher's okay with that. So like if I had something larger, then I would focus on that. If I didn't, then just ignore it for that one day, because otherwise then the day is still like hell. So but otherwise I guess it doesn't make me feel less efficient. It does the opposite. It makes me feel a lot better, more productive, and that's definitely something that has helped.
Yes, and I've heard that from you. I've heard it from your mom. I've heard it from your teacher too, that you went from sort of 5 days a week being so stressed that you didn't feel like you were accomplishing as much as you would like to 4 days a week, and suddenly you're happy and capable of meeting all the expectations. So
Yeah.
it seems counterintuitive, but it's not really.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you a little bit about stimming, because this year we've watched some videos on stimming, we've talked about stimming, and why it's actually a really helpful self-regulatory tool.
Yeah.
So, thoughts?
Stimming is definitely very important. It's not something that like people should see as like just movement that's not important, because I've had people like in public, or not necessarily like a random people obviously, but like during school, like I would have sometimes like a classmate or something ask me to like stop stimming because it's distracting and they didn't know what stimming is, and I would say I can't. It's helpful to me. That's what helps me focus. And there's different stims. Like a lot of people think that like every person stims the same way. It's not. There's different things that certain people do. Like one stim that I usually use is I take my hand kind of like this, and I just put it above my mouth, and my knuckles kind of go right here. And some people think that I'm putting my fingers in my mouth. I am not. I just kind of have it there, and you can see it's not fully touching my lip, and it's just a way that makes me feel good. Or sometimes I shake my leg, and that's another thing that I try not to do too much because it's very distracting for some people. Like sometimes while I'm talking, like I'm not sure, but I've been doing this for a bit. Like I kind of
Me
just my
too.
knee comes up.
I come from a long line of leg shakers, Eilish, in my family.
Mhm.
If you get us all together, we pretty much all have our legs shaking. So the good thing about Zoom this year is people don't see that I'm always shaking my leg.
Stims, though, are very like different things. For example, my brother, who is also autistic, as you know, he does kind of like this. He kind of just does this repeatedly, or like he does something kind of like this, like he kind of like just punches his own hand, and that's his kind of stim. I'm not sure if like that's just him doing it or if that's his stim, but from what I picked up, that's a stim because he does it quite a lot and usually when he's nervous.
Yeah.
And for me, I usually just do this or I might shake my leg.
Yeah.
And it's different for each person. So it's something that helps us focus and helps us stay calm. So if somebody tells us like to stop doing it and we don't, it's kind of like at this point, like to an extent, we can't. Our bodies are controlling itself. Like whatever part of the body is doing the stim is doing it itself. We can't stop it. And it's very difficult. Like I know that my mom the other day, not knowing about this, right? And she's saying, "Can you stop doing that, please?" And I was like, "I can't." And then she's like, "You can." And I was like, "I can't." I cannot. I cannot move my hands. And it's kind of, it's something that if you don't let us stim, it's very difficult for us to focus on a conversation or anything really, or stay stressed or stay calm, which is why I usually, like the first thing that I usually do when a new year or a new class, a new school year starts is when I meet my teacher. If it's not a new teacher, I've only had the same teacher in a row once. It's like 2 years in a row. That was the only time I had this. That was only once that I had that. I always just say like, "Hello, I do this, so please don't tell me to stop because otherwise it's going to be difficult for me." So it's usually the first thing that I always do when I meet my teacher. I'm just like, "Hi, I stim. Please don't tell me to stop," and be cool. That's it, really. Obviously, in a more formal manner.
Of course. Now, is there a difference between nervous stimming and happy stimming?
Yeah, usually. It's difficult to tell, I feel, because some people use the same stems for the same time. Like, one thing is that now that my family knows about the stem, they assume that if I have it like this, I'm automatically nervous or stressed, which most of the time is true. But, but sometimes I just do it because it's like also just focus, but like it doesn't necessarily mean I'm upset or unhappy. Usually the difference is that you can just see that our body language might not be showing as stress. Like sometimes my family says, "Why do you look so upset? What's wrong?" And I'm like, "I'm not sad. I'm very happy today." So like I can be super happy but look like I'm really sad, and my family always thinks I'm really sad, and I'm like, "I'm not sad. I'm not sad. I'm not always sad, okay?" I'm allowed to be happy sometimes.
And do you think that's because like your face isn't smiling and you're just you're not aware of your face?
Yeah, I've noticed that I'm not really a big smiler. I only really smile when I'm laughing, and that's it. And often people think that like I'm unhappy because I'm not smiling. I just personally don't really like smiling, and not because it makes me look sad, but like it's just uncomfortable, really. And it's kind of like uncomfortable for me to smile a bit. It just makes, it's like I don't like constantly having to have my face up like this. Like I can still be happy while looking like I just want to go back to sleep. I mean, I don't necessarily look happy here, but I'm happy.
And
I don't really look that happy, but I still am.
And it makes me think too, like we smile socially, right? So we smile around others, but when you're at home and you're happy, I mean, this is me, and I'm neurodivergent, I'm pretty sure too.
Sorry, let's have my camera for a minute.
So this might be a generalization, but when you're at home by yourself, do you smile? I don't think so. Like,
no, but that doesn't mean you're sad.
Exactly. So it's just, accepting and understanding there are different ways of being. I'm also wondering about the expectation for eye contact, because a lot of teachers may not understand
what that can be like. So what would you say about eye contact?
I guess it's different for each person, really. Certain it can be very difficult to make eye contact as like when you try to do that eye contact, it can be very stressful and difficult because I feel like I'm not sure if it's natural for everybody else, but for me it feels very unnatural to have to look somebody in the eye. I've also tried looking at their eyebrows instead. Still feels unnatural. I just prefer to look down, but it doesn't mean I'm not listening. And that's a misconception that people think, is that somebody's not making eye contact with you, they're not listening. But that's not really the case. As some people, it's uncomfortable to have to make eye contact. Is it for me personally? Having to make eye contact all the time, it feels like I'm staring at the person or the person's staring at me, which makes me very uncomfortable and anxious. And for some people, it's just hard and difficult. Like it's very difficult for some people, and it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is not interested in what you were saying. It's just not something that everybody is capable of doing, and that's all right. It's difficult when somebody says, why aren't you looking at me, or when teachers like, why aren't you looking, focus. And it's difficult because it can be uncomfortable, and it can also cause anxiety for me, I guess. I'm not sure about others, but I guess in my case, that's what it feels like.
Yes, I've read a lot of autobiographies of autistic folks, and often they've said, yeah, just uncomfortable, or some people say it's painful, like it's physically.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. It can be painful. Like I said, it's like, I'm not sure if it's physically painful, like if it, like you feel like that, but like your brain kind of makes you feel like it's painful. Like your brain kind of makes you think to an extent that it's uncomfortable and it hurts. And like I said, it can feel, it feels like very painful, even though it's kind of just all in your head. It's difficult, and it can't really just go away. Like when I say it's in your head, a lot of people think like, well then just stop, because that's how the world works. And I'm like, no. That is not how it works. I cannot just stop myself from my brain saying, okay, this is now going to hurt. I can't stop it. It's just how it is. I've tried trying to make eye contact with people, and it's difficult. Really. It's a lot of people try really hard to like do that as a form of masking. To an extent, like they try their best to make eye contact. And I personally am not somebody who's like private about my autism. Like if somebody asks me, are you autistic? I'll be like, yeah. Okay.
Can you explain what masking is, just for anyone watching this who doesn't know, and then tell us a little bit about what you were saying?
Personally, I see masking as somebody trying to hide the fact that they are autistic, or certain attributes that come along with being autistic for them. And a lot of the time that's from embarrassment, or just like stress about having to fit in. And I've tried that at one point, and there's certain parts that I still try to avoid people knowing. But other times, it's not the same, I guess. I guess before it was kind of out of embarrassment. I was nervous, I guess. I didn't like people constantly commenting on certain things I did that were related to my autism, and I didn't like how like some people would be like, because I know that some of them were just curious, but it felt like they were it felt uncomfortable for me, so I just kind of like not do those things a lot.
Yeah.
which it can, from my experience, it can be very mentally draining, even if you're not trying to hide everything, because it's difficult to hide who you are and act like someone you're not.
Now that you tell people a bit more that you are autistic,
Mhm.
are you less stressed? Is it a relief in some ways?
Yeah, a bit, because I've had like a little bit, like I'm not somebody who goes like to everybody I meet like, "Hi, I'm autistic." No. I only really say it if like somebody asks me. So like if somebody asked, "Oh, are you autistic?" I would say, "Yeah." Okay. That's it really. It kind of just feels good to like, I guess, cuz like as soon as people know that, they're a little bit more understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had a friend who was like asking me, and she's like, it was random actually, because it was, I guess she asked the right person because she was reading up about something, and she's saying, so the other day I found something that I didn't know was, and it's called autism. Do you know what it is? Because I can't find any definition. I can't find anything really on it. And I said, oh well, well, you found the right person to ask, I guess. And I was explaining to her how it is. It's just basically a different type of brain, and she was like, wow. She was genuinely shocked because she didn't even know it existed, and she didn't know I was autistic either. So she was asking about a lot of behaviors, and she kind of was like, oh, so that's why you do that. That's good to know, and everything. And I guess now I've kind of built a slightly better bond with her, I guess. She's the only one who has commented or asked about autism, though.
What are your thoughts about, Autism Awareness Day or Autism Awareness Month?
I personally like the idea about it. However, certain campaigns that do it, I guess, like, could be better. Like, certain ideas that are set out throughout it that are trying to, like, they're trying to, like, help, but some of them, kind of like how, the stereotypes I was talking about the other day, it's kind of like they're trying to help, but they're kind of not at the same time. Like certain ideas that are just set out there. One campaign that I know a lot of autistics don't really like is Autism Speaks, and a lot of people go there for information on autism, but some of the information they have is incorrect, as it's just a lot of the information there isn't necessarily the greatest. It kind of feels like they're taking advantage of the community and then using it to seem like a nice little organization trying to spread awareness, when really it's just doing more harm to the community. And it's not a nonprofit organization, actually. They do make profits.
So, so I guess advice for people looking for information on autism. So primary sources, go to autistic people.
Yes, exactly. Like, I hate when people kind of like, obviously there's some people who do know what they're talking about a lot, like people who have worked with people who are autistic, like you, for example, is that there's just like some sources that I hate when people like don't, like, all these things like about all this autistic stuff, but they never get any information from people who are actually autistic. They don't get information from people who experience it. They always get information from non-credible sources, which is it doesn't help. It's kind of like if like somebody wanted to get more information about what it's like to be blind, and they ask people who aren't blind.
Yes, that's
It's like it's like what you're not, like, even if some of that information is correct, you're not getting it from somebody who has experienced it, or who experiences it and lives with it. You're just it doesn't make sense to me. Really.
And then you shared some really insightful thoughts on representation.
Yes.
Yeah, of autism. So I would love for you to tell me again your thoughts on that.
There's different, I guess, stereotypes that people have come up with with autism. That some of them, I understand that like a lot of people are just trying to like put good information out there, but a lot of it is more harmful than it is helpful. And one problem that I really don't like about representation in the media for autism is like for actors and TV shows, they always use actors that aren't autistic to portray an autistic character, which is usually when stereotypes or misconceptions come in, which I feel like if they actually had autistic actors in that, then they would probably say something and be like, "Oh no, that's not how it feels. No, that ain't right, my friends. You must change that." But it's just such an issue because there's always different stereotypes that are at play, and none of them are exactly right because autism can never really be portrayed perfectly on these shows, considering that autism varies from each person. There's the first stereotype that I don't like, which is that one absolute genius that has an extremely high-paying job and they're autistic. And obviously, I'm not saying that that's not a possibility, right? I'm not saying that, like, that's not the thing. But I hate when people use that all the time because it's kind of making it seem like every autistic is, like, this going to have that kind of job, but that's not necessarily the case.
Yes.
We're normal people. You don't have to treat us like the thing that I don't like is those stereotypes that treat us like we're absolute idiots, and then the ones that treat it like we're all Einsteins. That's not necessarily the case. It's like we're normal people with our own interests, our own dreams and hopes, I guess. But stereotypes like that, I just hate them. Because it's kind of portraying it is that like every autistic is going to be like that, and that every single one is going to have a job like that, and if they don't, then they're a failure. But that's not the case. I've noticed that they always also use male characters. It kind of sets out a message that only boys can have autism. Another one is a lot of people I've noticed in the autistic community don't like The Big Bang Theory because they see it as like a bad representation of autism. However, I personally don't mind it because Sheldon is not supposed to be autistic.
Mm-hmm.
He's just meant to be Sheldon-y per se. Yeah. However, like I've noticed that why it doesn't bother me is that some people like think he's meant to be autistic. However, he's not. He's just meant to be, like the creators of the show said, that they don't consider his actions to be autistic-like. They just consider them to be him. That's how he is, and that's alright. But I've noticed that sometimes that show reminds me of my brother because Sheldon is literally my brother, and it's like, which is why. So like to me, it's funny. It's a funny representation. It's difficult to see which stereotypes are harmful and which aren't because there's some stereotypes that like certain autistics are like, and then ones that aren't the same. And it's why there's just such an issue with representation in the media, considering, I guess, that people are kind of seeing it as like autism is like every autistic is the same, but we're our own individual people.
Is it fair to say that then the issue is more a matter of range? If you had more diversity in representation,
yes,
then Sheldon or another character wouldn't be like the figurehead for autism. It would just be a person.
Yes, exactly. Like if there was also like more, like say if it wasn't just like one autistic in the show or whatever, like if there was something like that, obviously there could still be the main autistic character and then like maybe like a side one, just to show that they're not, like we're not all the same. As I just wish that there could be something that portrayed multiple autistics and that we're not all the same. And instead of it all just like we're not all like that one character. I've had somebody meet me and ask me like, "Oh, I thought that's what autism was based on a TV show." And it kind of just shows that like it doesn't necessarily mean that that's not what like a certain autistic might look like, but it also doesn't mean that's what every autistic will look like.
Yes. And we don't have
like,
a lot of non-speakers who are represented either.
Yes. For example, The Good Doctor is, I think that the representation is quite good. However, I wish that there was some sort of other character because it falls into that stereotype of the absolute genius with a great job, right? Like, it falls into that category of stereotypes, even though it has an amazing representation, but it's not all autistics, which is why. Like, it shows a lot of, for the parts that, like, are, like, how he feels about sensory and how he thinks, they have that quite well. However, with certain parts, it's kind of like this is just falling right about what every other TV show does, and it's harmful to this community, even if it's showing us as like extremely intelligent people, and a lot of autistics are, it's still harmful.
Yeah. Wow. You are so insightful. I always love hearing your thoughts on things. I have one last question for you, Eilish. I'm wondering what advice you have for other autistic children.
Is that if something is like necessarily bothering you or some sort of stereotype or something, you should say your mind on it. It doesn't necessarily have to be seen by millions of people, but like even just to family or friends, because I feel like the community is just very underseen. We aren't really necessarily seen as regular people a lot, even though we are. But I guess that's one thing to remember, is that the media representation isn't always correct, so you don't have to feel like you are obligated to act like that, really. Just, you should do what works for you and what helps you.
Wow. And I like the idea too of speaking to your family, speaking to people who are close to you, because we aren't in a place where autism is completely understood by others. So it is about bringing awareness to the people who need to know, or that you want to know, so that they can better support you.
Yes. A lot of people just aren't able to really understand that not everything is that simple, and that it's okay that somebody might not act the same way as you or learn the same way as you or follow a certain stereotype that you've seen on a television show. We're regular people. We're people with emotions and feelings and who have opinions and things to say. So why should we just be represented based on what everybody else thinks? We should be able to advocate for ourselves instead of people putting out that information that isn't true.
Well, I want to thank you so much. You are already an exceptional autism advocate, and I'm very excited to see where you go, what you do, whether you continue to be an advocate, whether you open your own animal rescue. You have so many things you might do, and I'll be excited to see you do any of them.
I mean, if this was a hamster interview, then this would still be going on. Trust me, this would be going on until 5 p.m.
I know, I didn't ask hamster questions because I knew we would the hamster hole.
We'd be here for a while. Quite a bit. That's okay.
Well, thanks so much, and I think we'll be talking next week. So have a great rest of your spring break.
You too. Bye.
Bye, Eilish.